Okay, let's talk about the decline of Western civilization.
Life, death, sex. It's pretty happening to me, you know?
Yeah.
No, not that one. That's The Decline of Western Civilization, The Metal Years, a great documentary about the metal scene. No, I'm talking about the idea that the days of Western dominance are numbered. It's one of the themes of a new book by Niall Ferguson. It's called Civilization, the West and the Rest. Niall sets out to answer some pretty epic questions. What made the West, meaning Western Europe and North America, the masters of the modern world for centuries? And have some of those same heights of Western power now passed, eclipsed by the likes of China and India and Brazil?
This is an extraordinarily unstable state of affairs.
The book has generated some controversy, but Niall is no stranger to criticism.
I got more and more disturbed by the complacency that I encountered on the part of market participants, who essentially laughed when I said, you could be struck by an enormous liquidity crisis.
Growing up in Glasgow, a fan of the Sex Pistols, he once said his hometown had two main industries, strikes and sectarianism. Still, Niall found his way to Oxford, earned himself a PhD, and made a name for himself in the realm of counterfactual history, posing the question, what if? What if the British had stayed out of the First World War? What if Hitler had stayed a painter and out of politics? And what's generated the most controversy for Niall? Well, his argument that colonialism, on the whole, wasn't all bad.
The world of 100 years ago was really defined by the fact that 25% of the world's land surface and population were under some form or other of British rule.
Critics say he's basically advocating for a stronger American imperialism that is dividing the world along racial lines. We'll find out what he has to say about those charges and what he sees as the next chapter in the story of the West. Please welcome to the show, Niall Ferguson. Good to see you, man.
Hey, George. How are you? Thanks very much for having me.
Of course, welcome. So when are you having the baby? Is it days away now?
It could be now, rather terrifyingly.
Wow.
I should really be there.
Well,
no,
let's see.
December the 25th is
exciting.
the due date.
How do you feel about that?
I'm sure I'm doing something else on that day. Doesn't that sound sort of familiar?
For the book, Civilization, the West and the Rest, who's the target? Not on the one you're attacking, but who is the target in this particular story?
The target audience, in some ways, is my teenage son, who's 17, and I wanted to write one book. If you're going to read one history book that will give you a sense of where the world came from, the world that we know today, then this should be it. So it's quite deliberately aimed at a relatively youthful readership. It gives you 600 years of world history. It gives you it with an argument, with an attitude, and I think it helps make sense of where we are now, because I'm a historian who thinks we study the past to make sense of the present. I'm unashamed about that. And to try to understand what kind of futures lie ahead of us. So it's really that.
When you're studying the past and try to make sense of the future, are there right answers or are there just opinions?
I think there are right answers, in the sense that we can come up with a compelling answer to the question, why did a minority of human beings, the ones living in the West, starting in Europe and then settling in places like Canada, why did they get so much richer than everybody else, and stronger and healthier and even taller? Why did they end up effectively ruling the world by the mid-20th century? I think one can come up with good answers to that question, and one can come up with wrong answers. So the wrong answer is, oh, racial superiority. That's clearly the wrong answer. The wrong answer is geography. That doesn't really work. It's not the weather either. And it's not religion, because after all, Europe had Christianity for about 1,000 years without much happening. So this is a book that comes up with, I think, some quite practical answers to this question, which have to do with institutions and ideas and things that change. People make them and they can unmake them.
So you said that racial superiority isn't a part of it. No doubt the colonizers went into many countries for whatever their reasons were, their motivations were, and there's a big reason why these countries, the modern countries, are successful, is because of the price paid by the indigenous people in a lot of other countries, wouldn't you say?
The least original thing that Europeans did after 1500 was empire. That was pretty much the standard institutional form. And when Europeans went out into the world, whether it was across the Atlantic or whether it was to East Asia, they encountered empires already. Nor were they original in introducing slavery as an institution that had existed long before European expansion. And indeed, there were Europeans who were slaves prior to 1500. So I don't, in the book, in any way diminish the negatives. I think I spend quite a lot of time exploring why slavery took the form that it did in the Americas. I spend a lot of time looking at what the effect of expropriation was on native peoples. But I don't think those things are the key to answering my question. those are not the novel things that propelled Europeans and then North Americans into positions of such power and prosperity.
So is the Western way, is it played out then, do you think?
I think there's a danger that it's entering a period of crisis. And I think we need to be much more self-critical about what has gone wrong in our societies. Certainly the inequality that has become such a focus of Occupy Wall Street is a symptom of something that has gone wrong in terms of diminishing social mobility. There's such a problem in public schools. You know, if you look at the quality of education in the average high school in a poor neighborhood, it's dire. Right. And when you look at the consequences in terms of, say, numeracy and literacy at age 15, the scary thing is that if you look at the data from the OECD, Asian countries are pulling far ahead of the US, and indeed far ahead of most of the English-speaking countries.
Are the Asian countries applying the 6 killer apps you're talking about? Are they learning from the past?
Yes. I mean, if you want to think of it this way, it's a bit like the apps on your phone. These are institutions and ideas, competition, the scientific revolution, things like that.
Scientific work ethic is a part of it, right?
The work ethic is a part of it. Consumer society is a part of it. No point having an industrial revolution without one of those. Modern medicine, remember, Westerners ended up by the early 20th century having life expectancy double the rest of the world. It's happened in our lifetimes because the pinnacle of Western predominance was long after the age of empire, long after slavery. It's really in the 1970s that the maximum divergence happens. And then China, later India, Brazil, these big non-Western countries modernize their institutions. They download the killer apps. So they change the way they run their economies. They change the way in which their societies operate. And it works, proving that it's nothing to do with race, nothing to do with even with traditional culture. If you get the right institutions and incentives, whether it's in your universities or in your law courts or in your stock market, then things will take off. And that has changed the world amazingly in our lifetimes. And I broadly welcome that. Indeed, I'm hugely supportive of the emergence of these big societies from poverty. What I worry about is the way in which our institutions are degenerating. And I think that's very obvious in some European countries, but it's also beginning to be obvious in the United States.
What's the reaction been to you being a white Brit talking about empires and reflecting on colonialism?
Well, I suppose not entirely positive would be a fair assessment. It would be.
Has some of the criticism been fair?
Oh, some of it has been distinctly unfair. I mean, I'm a believer that historical argument is an argument, and you want to make a case and then defend it. But if you're simply saying, as some people have, oh, well, this man is just nostalgic for empire, he's just some impossible Scottish reactionary, that's not reading my book. I do have a problem with people who review my books without reading them. If you could help me solve that,
sure,
I'd be really grateful.
Well, no, I understand that. You also have a problem with anybody writing anything bad about you, though. You also get it in your head, and then that's it. It's there forever, right? Have you worked on that?
I certainly don't, perhaps this is my Glaswegian upbringing, I don't take smears lightly, and I'm very unforgiving towards people who accuse me of things of which I'm not guilty. And I think that's a healthy attitude. I was brought up never to take the offensive, but to retaliate if attacked.
Do you find comfort or comedy in the fact that all the things that they despise about you in Britain make you really popular in the United States?
I wish they did make me really popular in the United States.
More popular
I don't really seek popularity. I mean, to be honest, the motivation that I have, the reason that I write books, and I've written now, what, a dozen books, is that I'm genuinely interested in trying to understand the past, even if it's uncomfortable, even if the truth is unpleasant and rather shocking and not what I expected when I started writing the book. That's what motivates me. And the other thing that motivates me is that I think I would like as many people as possible to rethink our history. That's why I make, appearances on television. I've made most of my recent books into TV series because I know how many people read books versus how many people watch TV. So I have a powerful urge to democratize historical knowledge because I don't think you can really understand where we are now and where we're going to if you don't know where we came from.
Did you like Zinn's look at history, people's history?
I didn't much.
He did that.
I didn't like it, although in some ways I'm happy with there being a relatively polarized range of historical stories. There isn't one narrative. There's something to be said for having a radical narrative like Howard Zinn's. It gives me something to disagree with. And I think people need to realize that history is an argument, but there are rules of engagement. You need to cite compelling evidence when you make an argument, and when evidence turns up that is not commensurate with your theory, you need to change your theory. That's the rules of engagement.
Here's the book here, Civilization, the West and the Rest. Niall Ferguson, everybody. We'll be right back.